It's not often that the mainstream media admits they publish fake news, but the New York Times did just that. And what makes this story even better is that this piece of fake news came after the New York Times called out conservatives for fake news. Let me explain. The New York Times wrote a profile of Facebook executive Campbell Brown. In the article, the Times said Facebook had been flooded with far-right conspiracy programming, like Palestinians pay $400 million in pensions for terrorist families. That right there is the problem. That's not fake news. It's not a far-right conspiracy. The fact that the Palestinian Authority pays terrorists to kill Israelis and Americans, that is something the Palestinian Authority themselves admits is true. With me now to break this down, former IDF soldier and former NYPD officer Micha Danzig. Micha, good to see you.
Good to see you, Liz. Thanks for having me on.
Of course, it's always great to have you. All right, Micha, after after the New York Times published this article about Facebook executive Campbell Brown, saying that line about calling the pay-to-slay programs, we always call them,
right,
calling that a right-wing conspiracy, they posted this correction. I want to read this. This was on April 23rd of 2018. Quote, an earlier version of this article erroneously included a reference to Palestinian actions as an example of the sort of far-right conspiracy theories that have plagued Facebook. In fact, Palestinian officials have acknowledged providing payments to the family of Palestinians killed while carrying out attacks on Israelis or convicted of terrorist attacks or imprisoned in Israel. That is not a conspiracy theory. Micha, it certainly is not.
No, it's really, as you said, you pointed out the incredible irony that the New York Times, in writing an article about Facebook's efforts to fight, quote, fake news, decided that their example for a fake right-wing conspiracy theory news piece is a news piece about something that, sadly, is completely true. The fact that the Palestinian Authority has a pay-to-slay program which pays people to kill Jews, that is a fact. And what's amazing is you would think the New York Times, before they actually publish such a piece, they have fact checkers. They employ these people to check facts, could even check their own newspaper, the New York Times. I mean, the New York Times, granted, hasn't run a lot of articles on the Taylor Force Act and the pay-to-slay program, but they have run some.
Right. I mean, they've talked about this before. All they would have to do, like you said, look at their own website. That makes it actually comical because it just shows so blatantly their agenda here. I want to talk.
And their bias, their implicit bias on anything to do with the Arab-Israeli conflict.
Right. Well, even their phrasing and their correction.
In a bad light, it's fake to them.
Right. Even the phrasing in their correction here, they say, in fact, Palestinian officials have acknowledged providing payments to the families of Palestinians killed, and then they add, while carrying out attacks or being terrorists. Yeah. Even that phrasing shows that they don't want to be correcting what they have to correct. So
they're choking on that admission. They're choking on it.
Right. Talk to me about this pay-to-slay program, though. How much money does the Palestinian Authority, how much do they give to terrorists or the families of terrorists who were killed? How much do they put into this pay-to-slay program every year?
So last year, before the Taylor Force Act was passed, the Palestinian Authority budgeted $356 million. Almost 10% of their national, quote, national budget, their government budget, towards paying the perpetrators of terrorist acts and the families of the perpetrators of terrorist acts a stipend, often for life. This year, at kind of like a in-your-face to the United States government and for passing the Taylor Force Act, they increased that number to over $400 million.
Right, which is shocking. So the Taylor Force Act, by the way, and this is where it gets into the nitty-gritty, because while the Palestinian Authority budgeted $350 million to pay off terrorists to kill Israelis and Americans, by the way, not just Israelis, not just Jews, while they paid $350 million, the United States gave over $300 million in quote-unquote aid to the Palestinian Authority. So essentially, our tax money was enabling the Palestinian Authority to pay their terrorists to kill Americans. That's horrendous.
And it's actually worse than that in some respects, because while you're right, Liz, that it's $350 that the U.S. gave last year in, quote,
$350 million.
$350 million in U.S. aid to the Palestinian Authority directly. The total amount that the United States gives annually to the Palestinians, either directly or indirectly, is $600 million. And so even the Taylor Force Act, which so many have decried is going to be so hard on the Palestinians, unfairly punishes them for paying people to commit terrorism, right? It doesn't affect all of their aid. It's not going to affect the aid to UNRWA, the United States the UN relief agency or refugee agency that deals just with the Palestinians. It's not going to affect numerous U.S. aid that goes to direct aid to the Palestinians. It's going to affect the money we give the Palestinian Authority, their government,
right,
which they, again...
Well, the Palestinian people are being treated unfairly. They're being used as pawns by the Palestinian Authority and by Hamas. I have sympathy for the Palestinian people because not all of them are going out and killing Israelis. Not all of them are minions, I would say, of Mahmoud Abbas and of the terrorist organization. They are the ones that are being victimized as well. They're being used as human shields as the Palestinian Authority purports this terror. The Taylor Force Act, thank goodness, it's about time we pass this, finally prohibits any money going to, or most money, like you said, going to the Palestinian Authority as long as they continue their pay to slay programs here. And I want to remind our viewers too, Micha, you and I talked about this story probably 6-9 months ago. I believe this happened late spring, early summer of 2017, of an example of the type of payment that the Palestinian Authority makes. We talked about a story of, I believe it was a 9-year-old girl who was a dual citizen of the United States, and she was living in Israel. Palestinian terrorists climbed up the side of her house, climbed into her bedroom, and stabbed her to death while she lay asleep in her bed. That terrorist was later killed. The Palestinian Authority is paying his family to this day.
Sure, and there's so many heinous examples. And the worst thing, the most despicable thing about the pay-to-slay program that the Palestinian Authority proudly brags about is that the more heinous the crime, the more people you kill, the more money you make. The terrorist who slaughtered the Fogel family, 5 people, including a 2-month-old baby, right? He will get the equivalent, if he lives to be the average age of a Palestinian in Judea and Samaria, he will get almost $2 million in pay from the Palestinian Authority. And the Palestinian Authority doesn't earn anything. Every dollar in its budget comes from aid.
Right.
The Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian people themselves are the world's largest per capita recipient of aid because they focus on death and hate and murder and not on being productive and actually building the infrastructure of a state so one day they could perhaps have independence. They don't focus on that. Instead, they focus on hate, and they're raised in this environment where their own government, the Palestinian Authority, names schools and parks and camps after a terrorist. The more heinous the terrorist, the more people he's killed, the more parks they get named after him, the more schools they get named after him, the more camps and soccer teams. And obviously, if you're raised in that environment and you know that you can make millions by killing a lot of Jews, how hard is it for you to take that step?
It's one of the most successful career paths. It's encouraged. It's heartbreaking for children who are born into this. It's disgusting for the Palestinian Authority to be brainwashing. It is child abuse. It's more than that. I mean, it's human rights abuse. Our basic human rights is horrifying. And shame on the New York Times to bring this segment full circle. This is such common knowledge, such obvious information. The Palestinian Authority knows that this happens. The U.S. government says this happens. The New York Times themselves has reported on this happening, yet they publish this as if it's fake news. Thank goodness that this was corrected. Some people are actually calling it the correction of the year because they're having to eat crow so badly. And I am glad that they did make this correction. Micha, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.